Bună seara, добрый вечер, good evening. Tonight we will have two presentations done by our dear guests Ana Popa and Bermet Borubaeva. The presentations are taking place in the frame of a workshop called Making Invisible Visible. And the workshop is dedicated to the topic of art and activism, and is focused on the need to make the certain issues related to urban environment more visible. For example, the air pollution is one of the issues that we would like to work with during the workshop, or a community that we would like to engage with during the workshop is the cycling community from Chisinau and somewhere else. So these presentations are reflecting partially the work and the activity of our guests, and we will use them as a starting point for our workshop during the next 2 days. And we also invite you to join on Friday at 6:30 for a critical mass event in Chisinau. More info, please look on the Facebook event. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Bermet, and you can take it over.
Да ладно уже. Так. Да уже все, да. Все. Это просто он медленный. Окей. Бернет, здесь микрофон, да?
Да.
Ага. А если я буду держать так?
Просто ты не будешь слышать, если я буду говорить.
Понятно. Хорошо. Такс. Se aude? 2020. Se aude, da? Eu pot să încep să vorbesc?
Da, mă. Să vorbesc
Okay, so I will do my presentation in English so that it's more international. Everybody understands. Hi, I'm Ana, and I prepared a short or not so short presentation about some topics that interest me and that are related to the topic of the workshop and of this week's activities. I would like to talk a little bit about some activist practices that have also elements of, as I wrote it here, playfulness, and I will explain what I mean by that. Oh, cool. Yeah. So first of all, in my understanding of my type of activism that I practice and that I like most. Okay, the slide is not. Okay. So I call them tools, let's say, for art and activism. So I think that these are some tools that are used both in artistic and activistic practices. And for me, those are the most important in my work, in the type of activism that I like. So for me, these are the keywords, let's say. So I think it's very cool and interesting to work with humor, to work with spontaneity, to work with elements of game, fun, and play, or let's call it like entertainment even somehow. Also important keywords for my work and what I will present are subversivity, the play or the use of the unexpected, also exploration of the absurd, so using some absurd elements or situations in your practice to gain more attention and visibility, and also to, let's say, take the people out of their local everyday activities and contexts. Also, a big part of what I'm interested in is actually intervention in public space. So public space is an important element also, and it can also be a tool actually for your work. And very important element is the local and cultural symbols. So in all of these tools, when we use them, we also try to integrate them in some local context so that they are more clear to the public that we address in the local place. And one of the last thing, I leave it at the end because it's more complex concept, tactical frivolity. Maybe I will talk about this concept a bit later. Okay, so first of all, I will not stop for a lot of time on this, but I just wanted to mention it because it's important. So my inspiration, a lot of inspiration that I have, I take it from artistic practices, and I'm really a big fan of some of these artistic currents that were in the past century that I mentioned here. Unfortunately, I don't have the time, and it's not the moment to go in very much detail, but if you didn't go across any of this art movements, you can check it out. So it's about surrealism and Dadaism that were at the beginning of the 20th century. They explore a lot this kind of absurd and unexpected and spontaneity topics. Then it's also Situationists that were in the 60s, and also Fluxus that was more or less in the same time with Situationists, so it was 60s and 70s. And some of the artistic practices that are kind of connected with activist work that I used to do and that I'm interested in is performance. So it's most of these currents that I mentioned are very performative in their ways, and also space intervention as one of the methods, and happening. So these are the main three artistic practices that also are used in activism. So let's say if I would have to put it in one concept, it's like artistic manifestation as a form of disobedience against some main discourses, so or against some some mainstream things. So the key concepts would be for this sphere of art, to have a critical approach, to have a performative character. Also, these artistic movements, they focus more on the process and not the final product. They have also an internationalist character. They are conceptual and political. So now I will talk, and that was like the artistic inspiration that I have, and now I will talk about some inspiration that I have that is connected with some groups in the past that used these techniques that I mentioned just right now in their work. For example, one of my favorite inspiration is this group from Poland from the 80s. It was called the Orange Alternative, Pomarańczowa Alternatywa, and it was super playful and super funny, subversive work that they were doing. They made a lot of happenings, like around 60 happenings in the time that they existed. And they were just trying to, because it was the 80s, it was still pretty strong censorship and communist times. They had to look for alternative ways to speak about their dissatisfaction. So they invented this kind of whole story about the midgets. So in this image you can see like the gnomes or the midgets, let's call them like this. They invented this whole story about the midgets, and every time they went on the streets they would dress like midgets, and they would promote the rights of the midgets and talk about how important it is that we also don't forget about the midgets. But it was of course an imaginary, it was more conceptual work. And I just want to share maybe a small fragment of one of their performances. This is exactly, it shows very well the work, the kind of work they were doing. Of course, it's not working. Yeah, anyways. Can I go to the link? Yeah, okay. Never mind. So this used to be a video, but never mind. I can just mention what was happening. So, for example, one of their performances, what they write on a super big banner. They write inflacja, which means inflation in Polish, and then they provoke the policemen to run after them. And they would just run around the city with this big banner and the police running after them. And after this, they made like a statement where they said, "Dear comrades, dear citizens of Poland, we have a very good news. We have to thank our militia, the police in our country, because they made the inflation run away, or the inflation disappear." So yeah, maybe afterwards, if I have time, I'll just show you, I leave the presentation, I will show you exactly the performance. And they would do a lot of this kind of actions. Here also, they played a lot with kind of the Polish language, and because Polish language has a lot of like phrasal verbs and expressions, so they use a lot of the linguistic possibilities and kind of put them in practice exactly as, like, not in metaphorical sense, but in practical sense. As I wrote here, for me, what was fascinating is that its main purpose, the main purpose of this group, it was actually started as a student group, was to find like an alternative way to oppose the authoritarian regime that was back then in Poland, and using just, you know, playful and peaceful manners to protest, and using absurd and nonsensical elements so that police could not actually have a reason to retain them, to arrest them, or to have anything against them. And this is super key important element, because actually this is also something that we use in our local practice. The fact that the police could not arrest them, because if they would do that, it would look very ridiculous. So it was a good strategy to kind of ridiculize the police and ridiculize the absurdities of the whole system, of the whole authoritarian communist system that was back then in Poland. So the technique that they were using was happening. Another important inspiration for me, but also for the group that I am part of, I mean the Rhythms of Resistance band we have here in Chișinău, is Murga, which is actually a pretty old form of street theater and kind of social engagement of communities back in Argentina and Paraguay. And what is interesting about this is that they kind of use this artistic expression by dancing, singing, and theater to talk about social and political issues that happen each year. So this happens, La Murga, they are like bands or groups of theater groups and dance groups. And once a year, when it's the carnival period, they gather in their own neighborhoods. They improvise some stages where different groups come up on the stage and make like a small performance. And usually the performance is also addressing political issues, mocking the politicians, mocking the social problems, mocking, but also like in this way, opening the discussion about these topics and making them more close to the people in the small communities, in the barrios, so in the small neighborhoods. And the third big kind of inspiration, and actually it's already about also what I'm doing, the Rhythms of Resistance band that is also, we have it here in Chișinău. And I will stop a little bit here to talk more about the history of Rhythms of Resistance, but not very long, because that's not still my main topic. But very shortly, so Rhythms of Resistance is like an international percussionist movement, let's call it like this, of people that play drums and play instruments, but they do it not just for the sake of the fun, even though the funny element is there, but also in order to engage in social issues, in protests, in social causes and political causes that are related with some fights that people have in different places around the world. So the story of this began in the 90s in UK, in London. In the 90s, there was this movement that was called Reclaim the Streets. They were talking a lot about, actually they were against the privatization of public spaces that was happening massively in the 90s in UK, and especially in London. So their technique of fighting this was actually making parties. So what they were doing, they were just spontaneously blocking a big street in the city, putting a big sound system and making a party, just a rave. So just raving on the street. And by this kind of regaining their right to space and their right to be on the streets. But unfortunately, there was a big minus in this. So when you have a sound system, it's very easy for the police to come and shut it down. So they were looking for a way to kind of not have to be kind of interrupted by the police, let's say. So some group of people, they decided to just, they had some connections, some friends that were playing samba music in the city, so they decided to make their own music by themselves. So if you have a sound system, you can easily turn it off, but if you are the person that is playing, it's more difficult to shut off the person, right? So they started to organize and to make their own music by playing instruments. And actually this became a super big thing. It was that was the music that was, played in the parties. And this started in London, and then this kind of group of samba players, because they were also part of, other struggles, activist struggles, they mobilized and they went to Prague in 2000, where it was the big IMF and the World Trade Organization summit. And they made a super big protest there. It's like was all the alter globalist movement from Europe came there to Prague, and they actually, samba as this activist music had a big role to actually block the summit and stop it from working. So this was one of the first big achievements, when it really showed that samba has this tactical role in a protest to kind of diverse the atmosphere and guide people in different directions. So somehow that at the end you manage to circle the whole area and just block the access to the actual summit. And why this is also important to mention, why is samba and not some other type of music? It was like a deliberate and conscious choice, because actually samba, it was a very specific type of samba, which is called samba reggae, and this is a genre of music from Brazil, of course, but from a specific region that is called Bahia, and that is mostly populated by people of African descendants. So in the 60s, when it was the dictatorship in Brazil, people like Afro-descendants, they had almost no rights. They were not even allowed to participate in carnival and play music. So they developed this own style of music that was called samba reggae. Was a mix of Caribbean and Brazilian samba, in order to kind of create their own discourse about the carnival, about music, and so on. So actually they began to make their own Afro Bloco. This was the name. So it was like a full block of musicians that were all from these Afro-descendant communities. And this way they kind of reclaimed their right to participate in social life and to play the music. And that's why when this happened in UK with the Reclaim the Streets, they took the inspiration from this 60s samba reggae music, and they began to explore exactly this type of rhythms. And the rhythms are also kind of connected to the whole context of Brazil in the 60s. Yeah, and that is a bit, that's it with all international inspiration and like in general inspiration on this topic of how to mix artistic and activist practices. And also I have some, I cannot not mention also some local inspiration. For me, this artist, Ana Popescu, is one of the artists that is exactly doing this, what we are talking about. So he is actually a very playful artist. He's playing a lot with national symbols, with local symbols, with different, let's say, funny or absurd situations. And what I like is that he works a lot in the public space. He goes a lot just to interact with people around. He has a pretty, let's say, unique approach and a unique presence. So it sometimes can shock people. It sometimes bring surprise. And exactly this moment of shock and surprise, in my opinion, is a good moment to kind of wake up, let's say, and start a new conversation. So that's why, for me, what he is doing is very valuable. And another inspiration is also from Ramin. Because he made a photo project in some villages in Moldova, but also in Ukraine, where he found some contemporaneous versions of carnival that we have. And it's super interesting that these carnivals, they relate a lot to their local context. So it's not only traditional characters, fictional characters that you can find in the carnival, but it's also, let's say, not so fictional characters. They have, in a village that is just by the border, for example, they have the contrabandisto, which is like the character that represents the people that do the contrabanda on the border, or they have the priest that is, I don't know, going crazy or something like that. So it's very interesting how people translate through some performative practices their own kind of local problems or local issues or local interests, and also they bring it to contemporaneity. So it's still actual in the times that they live, and they can easily relate to these things because it's their, it's what happens in their daily life. And now that I made this super long inspiration introduction thing, I will pass to the main topic. So I am part of a group here in Chișinău that is called Occupy Guguță, and also as part of this group, it's the Rhythms of Resistance band, let's call it like this. And I think that Occupy Guguță somehow started exactly to do this. So somehow we chose this path of creative and playful ways of protesting back in 2018 when it all started. And I don't actually want to talk a lot about it. I just want to give super concrete examples of practices that, activist practices that had these elements of, let's say, I don't know, spontaneous or interesting, unusual situations. For example, in 2018, we used to make like lunch, picnic in front of the president's office. We were very unsatisfied about the political situation back then in Moldova. So what we were doing is having the causa de masa. So it was like a word play, game of words, because it was like the lunch break, but also the lunch cause, let's say. So what we would do, we would just go, put the blankets, bring the lunch, and have lunch just in front of this building with political importance, let's say. And what is nice about this practice is that, first of all, it tries to give space for other people to engage, because we thought that lunchtime is a good time for people to have a break so they can, you know, do something different than just eat at their workplace, they could eat the lunch with us here if they support our ideas and they agree with what we preach, let's say. Another example, we actually do very, let's say, simple, I would say, actions, but the good thing is that they have a big impact. So, for example, another situation was on 14th of February, when it's the Valentine's Day. We went to a city where the mayor was also a pretty big political important figure that is very, very corrupt and bad. So what we did was we just write a very big banner, and we wrote like a message, like a love message. It was a love message for this corrupt politician. And we wanted to put the banner on the building of the city hall, where he theoretically works. We didn't manage to put the banner. I mean, when we were putting the banner, they already kick us out, the police. But we use a lot of very available instruments like live streaming on Facebook and stuff like that. So actually it was a very watched video, and a lot of people were able to see this action. So it still achieved its goal, right? And that was important. Also, this was an interesting case because after this we got a fine for putting this, but we sued the police that put us the fine. So we contested, I don't know the English word, and we actually, after super many trials, we actually won this case, and we demonstrated, like we proved that the police was not right to give us a fine, because this was a form of expression of our opinion. So the freedom of expression should be, like, it's concealed in the Constitution, so we were right to do it. So this is also nice because it was like a precedent to show to maybe other groups of activists or other people that it's okay to do this, and you have the right to express your opinion, and as long as it is not any violent action, all of our actions are non-violent actually. So we can show that you can have a big impact with your actions by being non-violent and just using simple but creative methods. Another example that I like is after a protest, when police used tear gas with the protesters, and it was like pretty like older women and men. Everybody was super angry because why do you use tear gas with some old lady? It's completely nonsense. I mean, it doesn't matter, she was old, of course, but it was just like absurd situation when police used their force. And after this, we made a big protest. The protest was actually very mixed, and was not only our group, but what we did, we took a table, we put it in front of the protest place, and we started to cut onions. So the idea of this protest was that if I want to cry, I will do it myself. So I will cut onions, and I will cry from the onions and not from the tear gas of the policemen. And why also these kind of actions are important, at least in Moldovan context, is because when you go to a protest, yes, on some topic that you want to show your solidarity with, maybe at the protest there will be groups that you are not don't really agree with them. Yes, like there is a big protest, maybe some political party will also be there, some opposition party will be there, but you don't want to identify with them. You want to also express that you are against something, but not kind of connecting with them. So this way, your group can kind of separate from the rest of the protest and have its own identity in the protest. So you can show that you have can show your message in a different way, and this will differentiate you from the rest of the protesters. So you kind of make a statement, hey, this is Occupy Gurguț, and we show our solidarity, but this doesn't necessarily mean that we, identify with the other people at the protest. Another very nice action that I like that we did when it was our president's, I think it was his birthday. Yeah, it was his birthday. And of course, there was a lot of nice messages, and everybody was saying, oh, our dear president, happy birthday, you are a super nice guy, and so on. So we felt, hey, it's like, you know, the balance is not very equal. I mean, let's also show the other part, not only the positive part. You know, I'm sure there is some reason to also kind of critique him on his birthday, not only say good words about him. So we kind of hold accountable our president for not intervening when 7 Turkish teachers were just deported from Moldova, were actually kidnapped, we say, from Moldova and took to Turkey last year. So it was already 2 years ago. Yeah, time passes fast. Anyway, so this was a very painful moment for Moldovan people because it showed that we have no power to protect people from dictatorships. Our president is actually very openly friend with the Turkish dictator Erdogan, so he just didn't intervene in this situation. And that's why at his birthday, it was almost 1 year after this kidnapping of the Turkish teachers from Moldova, we printed on paper their kind of biography with the picture of these 7 teachers, and we made airplanes and we throw them on the fence of the president's building. So all the paper planes arrive in front of the president's building. Yeah, and another action that we do, actually one of the, why are we called Occupy Guguț, the reason is that this is the place where we started and the main meeting point that we have in our movement. It's an old Soviet cafe that was shut down and privatized illegally and in very obscure ways by politicians and by people with a lot of money in Moldova. So it's kind of a symbol of our fight here. So other actions that we did, for example, in front of this cafe, we did a lot of them, but one of my favorites is the one with the banner "Не обращайте внимания." So in the park, it was this super festive big event about European friendship and how Moldova is on its way to the European family, and it was very, very happy manifestation. And again, as you can see, we sometimes try to bring in the public discourse some elements that are not so talked about or not so more tricky or more shady, so people don't want to talk about them. So in this, you know, happy context that was in the park, we brought this element of showing that, yeah, what European integration are we talking about when we still have super big corruption in Moldova, and when we still have just businessmen that can do whatever they want if they just, you know, have enough influence in the political structure and so on. So this was a way for us to show, kind of, show how that we are against, you know, painting this all in pink, let's say. And it was funny because there was many people in the park and they were just passing by. So this abandoned building is like, you know, staying there, and it's huge, and it kind of doesn't, you know, bring people's attention so much. And one of the almost last thing I want to say, yeah, so about you know, using very simple strategies or simple actions that will bring a lot of visibility to your cause and a lot of visibility to your group and your movement is also something that we do. And if we go back to the idea that was in Alternatywa Pomarańczowa Alternatywa, the Polish group from the 80s, you remember I was saying that they were kind of doing some funny and absurd actions so that police would look ridiculous if they stop them or if they arrest them. It would be super ridiculous. Actually, this happened to us also, and this technique, maybe consciously or unconsciously, we use it a couple of times. One of the biggest moments that we had when we kind of exposed the absurdity of our system was when police stopped us on our way to a manifestation in another Moldovan city. We were going there with the drums. In this car that you see in the photo, we had like the the whole car was full with drums, and the police stopped us to ask for documents for these drums. So it was a very absurd situation where they kind of asked us to prove that the drums are not stolen, that it's our drums. Of course, we didn't have such documents, so they keep us more than 1 hour just in the snow, in the cold, to kind of figure out this problem. It's a lot bigger context, but I will not mention it right now. This kind of became like a meme, I think, in some groups in Moldova. This kind of documents for drums situation was very visible, and I think that it was our most popular live stream on Facebook. I think it was more than 10,000 people that looked at this video and shared it. So again, this was a situation when you expose how ridiculous some of the system practices are. And one of the most recent, I cannot not put it in my presentation, one of the most recent happenings or performance that we did that also was very ridiculous, let's say. It was when we made a solidarity action with the protesters from Belarus. And we went in front of the Belarus embassy, and I just thought maybe I had some chalk with me, and I just thought maybe we can write our messages with the chalk on the sidewalk. And the police, not policemen, but carabinieri, it's another type of power structure in our country. They were very annoyed about the fact that we were writing with the chalk on the pavement, and they actually called the police. The police came, they write down the contact of one of our people, and they put us, after some very bureaucratic meetings, they gave us a fine, 900 lei for painting with the chalk on the sidewalk. And again, yeah, this is the kind of situation when you do apparently very not offensive, very innocent action of writing with the chalk on. It's something that it doesn't really affect anybody. It will be gone by tomorrow morning. But we found a practice that is very simple, but in the same time very powerful. Yes, because it shows again how this machinery, this mechanism of systemic stupidity works, and how these bureaucratic and power structures that are in our society are just sometimes getting to very ridiculous situation. That's it. Thank you for your attention. I didn't talk about bike stuff because I wanted, first of all, to put a wider context to what means to use activist and artistic playful practices in your work. And yeah, that was my main purpose. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thanks very much.
And I thought, yes, you told a lot about meetups. I think it should be also demonstrated. Maybe just the link that we can speak. And
sure.
At least, yeah, and also I just wanted to say that I have one film director. She's making documentary film and shows to a company called Culture of Prison.
Oh.
Yeah. Interesting that maybe I also can keep you in touch with show because they are very
Okay, yeah, sure. Would be interesting, of course.
expression of report maybe to some device because other people cannot hear.
Any other questions? Vladimir, do you have any question?
I do, but can you switch off the mic?
Okay.
I have 2 questions, if it's okay.
Yes.
You can hear me, da?
Yes, I hear you, Clara.
Cool. So the first,
Mike.
Wait, Clara is asking a question. Yeah, Clara, go ahead.
Da? Okay. So first question is, I noticed in Moldova maybe more, but in general, that for such movement, it's like kind of a wanted side effect that there is some repression from the police. I mean, there's some excitement that maybe the police will come and try to shut us down, and it's some sort of pride in it, and then it's like some measurement of impact that we did something right if police comes, and then there's a lot of noise and promotion of this oppression of the police for what we did, and then it turns into a separate content just around this. So I was wondering, because I think for me at least this should be like something, an anomaly that shouldn't happen in a healthy system. And I'm wondering what would be an alternative. Well, first, if you agree with this, and second, what will be an alternative to have a measure of how these movements and actions work without this direct opposition and force from authorities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. It's a good point, actually. I discussed this a lot with my friends, this topic, and I also get annoyed about it sometimes. I agree that there is a tendency, I don't know if especially in Occupy Gugutse, but in general here, and I noticed this from also other post-Soviet countries, I don't know if it's something specific, but from my friends, activists from other countries, I also noticed this, that how the response of the police is somehow showing how successful your action was, and I agree that this should not be the like something to be proud of or something like this. Sometimes it does feel a bit like that. I also felt it in some situations, and frankly speaking, I'm not a big fan of that. I have 2 things to say. First of all, I think it's still good because one of the, in my opinion, one of the things that we are kind of doing in Occupy Gugutse is testing the limits, right? So testing where is the, how far away in Moldova is going freedom of expression, for example, yes, or freedom of assembly. And we just kind of test the ground. Let's say in this way, maybe other groups or other activists from the civil society can already have these examples and know how to behave. Also, maybe be like some kind of testing experimental situations. So from this point of view, I think this is okay. So if you just test in the limits of decency, of course, and of non-violence. If you test, okay, if I write with chalk here, let's see what will happen, yes? So you're kind of experimenting to see how enforced are your rights, yeah, your freedom of expression, your freedom of assembly, and so on. So from this point of view, I think it's something good. But from the other point of view, yes, I agree that sometimes sometimes these practices go a bit in this direction, as you said. Yeah, but yeah, and then answering to the other thing, how can we, in different way, achieve our goals? Let's say. Well, I think that. This is not our main goal. So I think, at least from my perspective, in Occupy Gugutse, our main goal is not to, annoy the police, get the attention from them, and then make a PR on this, of course. But I think that it happens. We sometimes don't even expect it, so it's not like something we plan and then we provoke the police to interact with us. This is the point, like I said before, we test these limits, we test the ground, we experiment, and sometimes we just happen to realize that the thin line is actually a lot, closer than we thought. For example, the chalk thing, yes? So this is a good example to see, how oppressive is the state, how free you are in your expression in your country, and how far you can go and what you can do. And I think for the, let's say, healthiness of the civil society and of artists, of activists, it's very important to understand that, right? To understand what are the limits in your country of expressing yourself freely and expressing what you think. Also, I think that we did achieve some, if we talk about more concrete goals, we did achieve something by this attention. For example, I think that the Cafe Guguță spot for sure right now is more on the, on the public agenda than it was a couple of years ago. Also thanks to other groups, but also thanks to Occupy Guguță, for sure it's a more visible place. And this is important to just keep it on the public agenda, to keep it visible and so on. And then another thing is that maybe we did change a little bit the perception of what it means to protest, right? So maybe in at least some groups of the society, we showed that you don't have to just, come on the street and shout "Hoți, hoți," that you can also, choose other forms of protest, and they are also valid, and they can also, express the problem and expose the problem. Yeah.
Thanks, Anuta. Really interesting. And if I can also add the second question, if it's okay.
Yes.
And please. I'm not taking the talking space from anyone. The second question was, how important would you say the presence in the media is for such movements of playful and against the system actions? Like, how much effort should be dedicated to ensure that media comes, TV come and film it, or it's presented before it's popularized in online platforms and all this?
Actually, I think we are very lucky, but because we live in the times when right now we can be our own media. So we live in the times when actually live streams on Facebook, it's actually a super nice form of just promoting your cause, right? If you have enough followers, or even not, even if you don't have, if it's an interesting topic or something interesting is happening in your video, people will start to share, and you just become your own media and your own promoter, let's say. That's one thing. So I think that in the times that we live, DIY media is super okay. We have enough, internet space, and internet is actually a lot more popular than traditional televisions, maybe in some of our target groups. So it's not that difficult to gain the attention, I guess, if you want. And the second point is that this is more like contextualized to Moldova. We are a pretty small country, and media outlets are pretty hungry of content. So actually, most of the times is the media that is not most, but a lot of times is the media that actually contacts us to ask, hey, what action are you preparing? Hey, tell us what are you going to do? Can we come? And so on. So actually, in the context of Moldova, it's not that difficult to get media attention. So we are lucky from this point of view.
Nice. Thank you.
Welcome, Clarita. Yeah.
I have a question. It's like when, it's a stupid question, but when do you feel yourself activist, and when do you feel yourself more like an artist?
That's it? Well, I don't feel an artist most in any context almost. I was always attracted to this world, I think, artistic world, but I never felt that I can use the word artist for myself. Actually, I have a very liberal view of what art means, and actually most of the stuff that I do or other of my friends do, I consider it art, in the sense of, you know, for me, art has this super important element of performative process, performative element. So in this sense, you know, we every day take part in some performance. We every day kind of have the chance to do something twisted and you know, put it in. If you put it in an artistic context, it will totally work. So from this point of view, yeah, I don't feel comfortable with any of the terms. I don't feel comfortable to call myself activist, and I don't feel comfortable to call myself artist. I have actually a big issue with how to call myself. So it's true that maybe I have to work a bit on my self-identification. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe on the contrary, find a third way. Like maybe it's not needed to fit one of these forms.
Yeah.
There was a question.
There is a question when we will discuss the cycling as alternative transportation, but I believe that will come later after Bermet's presentation. So if there are no more questions, we can make a short technical break, 5 minutes, and continue with the presentation of Bermet.
Yeah, if somebody's asking, maybe we should just mention that. So the presentation was supposed to be, I tried to make it more general about in general, the practices where activism and art is kind of emerging together. But the practical part or the workshop part will be dedicated to how we use these activist and artistic practices together already in the context of bike and alternative transport and air pollution in Chișinău. Yeah, thanks.